One quiet morning in June 1908, the skies over Siberia lit up like the world was ending. A mighty flash shone across the sky, followed by a sound so powerful it knocked people off their chairs in villages hundreds of miles away. The windows far off shattered and the earth shook. And deep inside the Tunguska forest, 80 million trees were flattened in an instant, covering an even bigger area than some countries. To those who saw it, it was as if the heavens themselves had exploded. Some group of investigators finally reached the site years later, and what they discovered shocked them. They found no crater or hole in the ground that should have explained the destruction. The strange absence gave rise to really wild theories. While some people said it was a secret weapon that had gone wrong, others said that it had to be a UFO that came from the sky. Some other theories thought it was a massive underground volcano that burst upward. The wreckage was real and massive, but the cause still had no explanation. Bit by bit, science began to eventually unravel the mystery. The evidence pointed not to Earth, but to space. Scientists with correct analysis gave the answer. A comet fragment, or a meteoroid the size of a house, had raced through the atmosphere before exploding mid-air. The fireball released energy equal to more than 1,000 Hiroshima bombs, clearing out the forest and leaving the landscape in a disastrous state for days. The truth was clear. Tunguska wasn't some secret atomic bomb. It was just the universe acting out. One tiny rock breaking apart at the wrong height, unleashing a destruction greater than anything humanity had ever seen. And more than a century later, the scar of that day still lies frozen in the Siberian forest. In the chaos of Russia's revolution in 1918, Tsar Nicholas II and his family were marched into a basement in Ekaterinburg, where they were executed. Their bodies were buried in secret, but when investigators finally uncovered the graves decades later, something just didn't add up. One of the children was missing, the princess, possibly Anastasia. That gap opened the door to a legend that captured the world's imagination. The idea that Anastasia had survived spread like fire. Then people came out of nowhere, claiming they were the long-lost princess, the most famous being Anna Anderson, who spent years pushing this point. The movies and novels didn't help matters, but added fuel to the fire. The hope that the young royal girl had slipped through the hands of a cruel history is the kind of a fairy tale everyone likes to hear. But that was all it turned out to be, a fairy tale. As science advanced, the mystery was finally unraveled. DNA testing in the 1990s confirmed that most of the family lay in the original grave. Still, the two missing bodies kept the legend alive. But then in 2007, archaeologists uncovered a second burial nearby. Inside were the buried fragments of two children, later confirmed by DNA to be Alexei and the missing daughter. The Romanov story was complete, and the truth was painful. Anastasia had not escaped. She died with her family in 1918. For nearly a century, hope had changed a tragedy into a fairy tale. But in the end, the old bones told the truth. On a summer night in 1977, a giant radio telescope in Ohio picked up something scientists had never seen before. For 72 seconds, a signal pulsed at a frequency that nature rarely touches. It was clean, powerful, and strange. Astronomer Jerry Eman circled the printout in red ink and scribbled one word that said it all: wow. That single note gave the signal its name, and for decades, it was the best evidence humanity had ever caught of life beyond Earth. With this, the many theories began coming in. Was it a message from intelligent beings, a cosmic hello sent across the stars? It wasn't clear. The mystery was in books and in documentaries. But modern astronomy, though, offered a better and proven explanation. Comets, surrounded by vast clouds of hydrogen gas, give off energy at the exact frequency recorded that night. When researchers looked at star charts, they realized two comets, 266P Christensen and 335P Gibbs, had been passing through that part of the sky in 1977. Their hydrogen tails may have been the true source. The truth smashed a lot of hope, because what seemed like the first contact with the cosmos was most likely a comet drifting by, and wasn't proof of aliens. It was the universe playing a trick with ice and gas. For centuries, Helike was treated as a myth told by ancient writers like Strabo and Pausanias. Helike was a prosperous city in Achaia on the north side of the Peloponnese in Greece. The writers describe it as a thriving city that in a single night in 373 BCE was swallowed whole by the earth and sea. People said Poseidon himself had punished the city, sending waves to erase it. Later, travelers claimed to see ruins glimmering underwater, but the city itself had vanished. To generations, Helike was the Atlantis of Greece. For 2,000 years, scholars argued over whether it had ever been real. Then, in the late 20th century, archaeologists began digging, not under the sea, but under farmland near the Gulf of Corinth. What they found stunned everyone. Helike hadn't sunk into the abyss. It had collapsed into a lagoon and been buried under silt. Excavations uncovered coins, pottery, and even entire streets preserved in mud. The farmland revealed ancient buildings, a silent proof that the city's destruction was geological, not divine. So the story flipped. Helike wasn't a myth. Neither was it a warning from the gods. It was a real place, sealed under earth and water until science brought it back to light. Stories about the Bermuda Triangle began to spread in the mid-20th century, turning that stretch of ocean between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico into one of the most infamous places on Earth. Ships were said to vanish without a trace, planes disappeared during flight, and crews were never seen again. One of its notable mysteries was that of Flight 19 that disappeared in 1945, leading to the loss of 14 crew members and eventual rescuers. When people tried to explain the phenomenon leading to such a strange disappearance around the triangle, their theories only added to the mystery. Some claimed it was a doorway to another dimension. Some other people claimed it was aliens snatching travelers from the sky. But that was not all. A dominant idea was that it was a hidden underwater base pulling ships to their doom. And just like it always happens when books and television got a hold of it, the triangle became legend. It was the ultimate hotspot for supernatural speculation. But when scientists finally studied the region carefully, the picture changed. According to their observation, wreckage that was thought to have been gone forever was discovered on the ocean floor. Secondly, records revealed that storms and violent weather were common there, and researchers pointed out something simple but crucial. This zone of the Atlantic was one of the busiest travel corridors in the world. That meant more traffic, more accidents, and more chances for mysteries to grow. Meteorologists showed how sudden squalls could push planes fatally off course. Oceanographers explained how rogue waves and shifting currents could swallow even large vessels without leaving much evidence behind, and in less serious cases, cause navigational errors by heavy sea traffic and hurricanes. And with these proved explanations, the Bermuda Triangle looked less like a cursed region and more like a perfect place for bad storms. The so-called mystery wasn't hiding alien technology or magical portals. It was hiding something far more ordinary but just as deadly. The power of nature combined with human mistakes, all concentrated in one of the world's busiest routes. But by this time, some books have been sold in millions that gave an extraterrestrial answer. In 2016, a team digging at Katsuren Castle in Okinawa uncovered a surprise that no one could have predicted. Buried in the soil were tiny bronze coins that did not belong there at all. They weren't Japanese or even Asian. They were Roman, dating from the 3rd or 4th century AD. Alongside them, archaeologists also found a coin from the Ottoman Empire, minted more than 1,000 years later. The discovery left everyone stunned. There were no records of Roman ships reaching Japan, no accounts of Roman merchants or soldiers crossing the Pacific. The distance was very large, and their cultures were entirely separate. So how could coins from the heart of the empire appear in a ruined Japanese castle? The answer was in trade. Katsurin Castle had flourished between 12th and 15th centuries as a hub of regional exchange. Ships from China, Southeast Asia, and beyond all passed through, carrying goods, currency, and curiosities. A Roman coin had left Europe, traveled across the Silk Road, been exchanged in Asia for centuries, and eventually made its way to Okinawa long after Rome itself had fallen. By then, it was no longer money. This proved how wide and connected ancient trade networks really were. A single coin could cross thousands of miles through dozens of hands until it reached a place as far as Asia. For many years, archaeologists assumed that Japan's Ryukyu Islands were too remote for anyone to reach in ancient times. The waters were dangerous, the currents fierce, and the distance long enough to discourage even skilled sailors. The theory was that if humans ever ended up there in the past, it must have been by accident, like fishermen blown off course or survivors of shipwrecks washed up on the beaches. Living there by choice seemed impossible. But evidence began to move away from that idea as excavations revealed stone tools, pottery, and food remains that stretched back tens of thousands of years. These weren't the traces of an accident. These evidences put together showed communities that hunted, cooked, and thrived there. Genetic studies backed it up, suggesting humans had been in the Ryukyus as early as 30,000 years ago. Even more telling was what modern science finally added. Ocean current models and satellite data showed that reaching the islands could never be a matter of luck. To cross those treacherous waters, settlers had to read the winds and navigate the open sea. These were well-planned voyages, with the settlers even carrying supplies and arriving with purpose. The entire story flipped upside down. What was once written off as accidental settlement was in fact deliberate exploration. The first people in the Ryukyus weren't lost fishermen. They were daring voyagers who pushed across dangerous seas to build communities. When archaeologists excavated the ancient city of Lachish in Israel in 2016, they uncovered what looked like an ordinary ivory comb, made from valuable material. It probably once belonged to someone wealthy, but nothing about it seemed unusual. For years, the comb sat in storage, like many other countless discoveries. Until 2022, researchers took a closer look. Faint marks carved into the ivory turned out to be letters, carefully scratched by hand. Not only that, they formed a complete sentence, dating to around 1700 BCE. It was the earliest known full sentence written in the Canaanite alphabet. Until then, scholars had believed early Canaanite writing was limited to names and short inscriptions. A full sentence wasn't expected, but the comb proved otherwise. Its message read, "May this tusk root out the lice of the hair and the beard." On the surface, the words were funny, a simple wish for relief from pests, but the implication to us is much more deeper. It showed that even nearly 4,000 years ago, people used writing not just for records or rituals, but for daily life and ordinary problems. Yes, one of the most important early alphabetic sentences we have wasn't carved into a temple or a monument. It wasn't a royal decree or a sacred prayer. It was a practical note etched onto a lice comb. The humble object rewrote the history of writing by proving that alphabetic systems were alive and in use much earlier than most experts believed. In the vast desert plains of southern Peru, enormous shapes are seen across the ground like spirals and perfectly straight lines carved into the earth. They're so large that for centuries, nobody on the ground could see their full designs. Only when planes flew over in the 20th century did the world realize the desert floor was covered in gigantic geoglyphs. the discovery sparked one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. Why would an ancient culture carve drawings that only make sense from the sky? The theories were endless. Some said the lines were offerings to gods who looked down from above. Others claimed they were astronomical calendars, marking the movements of the sun and stars. The usual mysterious people claimed the desert had been an alien airfield, with the lines serving as landing strips. The mystery became more legendary with every decade. But in the modern era, new technology shifted the theory. Drones and satellites revealed details no one had noticed before. Researchers realized many of the straight lines pointed directly to underground water systems hidden below the desert. Some lines led to spiral stone structures called pukyos, which were actually ancient wells designed to channel groundwater. For years, the pukyos themselves had puzzled archaeologists. Their purpose wasn't fully understood, but when researchers connected the geoglyphs to these hidden water systems, the answer came into focus. The Nazca weren't making giant art for the amusement of gods or aliens. They were mapping survival itself by carving guidance into the desert floor so their communities could find life-giving water in one of the driest regions on Earth. What once looked like mysterious artwork from the skies turned out to be a construction for survival. The Nazca weren't signaling to space. They were leaving lifelines across the desert for their people. In 1901, sponge divers searching the waters off the Greek island of Antikythera stumbled across a wreck filled with treasures. Among the statues and bronze artifacts, one lump looked unremarkably corroded, green, and encrusted with centuries of salt. For a year, it went unnoticed until archaeologist Valerio Stace spotted tiny gear teeth on its edge. Could it actually be a machine? The idea was so unbelievable that most dismissed it outright. For decades, experts tried to guess what it was. Some thought it was a simple astrolabe used to measure stars. Others claimed it was for navigation at sea. But the real skepticism came from the belief that no ancient culture had the ability to build something so advanced. A computer-like device wasn't supposed to exist until more than 1,000 years later. That doubt lasted until the mid-20th century. Historian Derek Del Sola Price examined it closely in 1959 and suggested something almost impossible, that it was an astronomical calculator. At the time, the idea seemed too bold, but in the early 2000s, scientists finally scanned the fragments with high-resolution X-rays. What they saw inside was astonishing. Dozens of delicate gears, some with teeth less than a millimeter across, had been hidden inside the corroded bronze. By 2005, researchers confirmed the mechanism could track solar and lunar cycles, predict eclipses, and even time the ancient Olympic Games. In 2021, a team at University College London produced a digital reconstruction showing just how precise the device had been. It was, in effect, the world's first analog computer, built in the 2nd century BCE. The discovery flipped our assumptions upside down. For centuries, we thought ancient technology was far behind. But hidden in a forgotten wreck was proof that Greek engineers had created a mechanical model of the cosmos, a marvel of gears and genius 2,000 years ahead of its time. The ruins of Rome stand tall even after 2 millennia, defying wind, rain, and sea. The Colosseum, aqueducts, bridges, and harbors built more than 2,000 years ago remain intact, while modern concrete often crumbles in less than a century. Engineers spent generations wondering, how did the Romans make concrete so strong? For years, people guessed. Some thought Rome had access to rare volcanic ash no one else could find. Others argued only the toughest structures had survived while weaker ones vanished. And many assumed modern science was obviously superior, so Rome must have gotten lucky. The truth came only when researchers put samples of Roman concrete under the electron microscope. Inside, they noticed tiny white lumps of lime that looked like mistakes. For centuries, builders assumed these were flaws, evidence of sloppy mixing, but in 2023, scientists from MIT and Harvard showed that the lumps were the secret ingredient. The Romans weren't making mistakes. They were practicing a technique called hot mixing. By adding quicklime directly instead of slaked lime, they triggered chemical reactions during the settling process that locked small lime chunks into the concrete. These clumps had a hidden purpose. When cracks formed over time, water seeped in and dissolved the lime, which recrystallized and sealed the gaps. The concrete literally healed itself. Instead of weakening, Roman structures grew stronger when exposed to the very elements that destroy modern concrete. The genius of Roman engineering wasn't luck. Their so-called flaws were deliberate innovation. They built concrete that repairs itself, explaining why their harbors still stand strong while modern piers crumble. Rome's secret wasn't hidden in myths. It was hidden in chemistry. In 2003, deep in Chile's Atacama Desert, searchers uncovered a skeleton that looked more like science fiction than science. It was only 6 inches long, with a sharpened-shaped skull, hardened bones, and a body unlike anything doctors recognized. Photos of the tiny remains spread across the internet almost instantly. To many, it looked like undeniable proof of aliens. Even experts admitted they were staring at one of the strangest human-like skeletons ever found. Theories piled up. Some claimed it was a hoax patched together from animal bones. Others swore it was a hybrid caught between human and extraterrestrial. Documentaries dramatized it. Online debates raged. For years, the little figure, nicknamed Ada, stood as a bizarre enigma. The truth finally came out in 2018 when scientists sequenced Ada's DNA at Stanford. The results were clear. Ada was not an alien at all. She was human, a girl less than a century old. The twist was genetic. Researchers found rare mutations in her DNA connected to bone growth. These explained the elongated skull, the missing ribs, and the unusual stature. Ada likely suffered from conditions like dwarfism and scoliosis. She had probably been stillborn or died very young, preserved by the desert's dry climate. The story that had fueled alien theories turned out to be heartbreakingly human. Ada wasn't proof of life beyond Earth. She was evidence of how genetic disorders can shape the body in ways that seem unearthly. What looked like an extraterrestrial mystery was really the fragile story of a short life in the Chilean desert. On the first day of December in 1948, a man's body was found propped neatly against a seawall at Somerton Beach near Adelaide, Australia. He wore a crisp suit and polished shoes. There was no wallet, no identification, and every clothing label had been carefully cut out. In one pocket was a slip of paper carrying the words "Tamam Shud," Persian for "It is finished." Police searched fingerprints, dental charts, even international records, but the man's identity remained a blank. Theories quickly spread. Was he a Cold War spy poisoned by enemies, a secret agent, or simply a drifter carrying an unexplainable code? The mystery became one of Australia's most enduring unsolved cases. In the 1970s, detectives thought they had a lead. The slip of paper matched a rare copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. A copy of the book turned up with scribbled codes and a phone number linked to a local nurse. The trail felt promising, but soon went cold again. Decades passed, and the Somerton Man remained a riddle, half spy thriller, half ghost story. The breakthrough finally arrived in 2022. Researchers analyzed preserved hair and ran the DNA through genealogical databases. Bit by bit, a family tree formed. The mysterious man was revealed to be Carl Charles Webb, an engineer born in Melbourne in 1905. He wasn't a spy at all. His life had been troubled, marked by separation from his wife and family disputes, and it was likely ended in Adelaide for reasons tied more to personal struggle than espionage. After 74 years, the answer closed the case. The Somerton Man was not a hidden agent or a global mystery figure. It was an ordinary man with an ordinary, if difficult, life. The greatest mystery in Australian crime history ended not with codes and assassins, but with human frailty. In Michigan's Upper Peninsula, near the small town of Paulding, locals whispered about a glowing orb that floated through the trees at night. Along an abandoned stretch of railroad, people claimed to see a steady ball of light drifting back and forth. Since the 1960s, crowds gathered at dusk to watch it. Some said it was the lantern of a brakeman killed in a train accident. Others insisted it was the ghost of a murdered mail carrier searching endlessly for justice. Paranormal groups filmed it, calling it one of America's greatest unsolved hauntings. For 50 years, the legend grew. Travelers came from across the Midwest to watch the Paulding Light, convinced it wasn't swamp gas or headlights. Even skeptics admitted the glow seemed too steady and too precise to dismiss so easily. In 2014, a group of engineering students from Michigan Tech set out to test the mystery. Using telescopes and spectrographs, they tracked the light carefully across the horizon. Their results were conclusive. The glow lined up with the highway miles away. What people had been watching for decades wasn't a ghost at all. It was headlights and taillights from cars cresting a hill, distorted by layers of warm and cool air in the valley. The atmosphere bent the light upward, creating the illusion of an orb hovering above the trees. For half a century, people had believed they were seeing the supernatural. In reality, they were staring at traffic blurred by physics. The Paulding Light wasn't a haunting. It was an optical trick of air and distance. By the late 1800s, European museums displayed strange and glittering artifacts that captured the public's imagination. Crystal skulls said to come from the ancient Maya and Aztecs. Perfectly carved from quartz and polished until they gleamed, they were rumored to hold mystical powers. Some claimed they were sacred relics thousands of years old. Others went further, saying they were alien gifts, carrying prophecies of healing energy. The timing was perfect. Europeans were obsessed with exotic artifacts from the Americas, and the skulls seemed too flawless to be explained by Stone Age tools. They became prized treasures, paraded as proof that ancient civilizations had secret knowledge far beyond their years. But cracks in the story appeared quickly. None of the skulls had been unearthed in real archaeological digs. Instead, they traced back to a single source, Eugene Boban, a French antiquities dealer with a flair for the dramatic. By the 1990s, modern analysis ended the debate. Under the microscope, the skulls showed marks by rotary wheels, the kind invented in the 19th century, and the quartz itself didn't match deposits in Mexico at all, but rather sources in Brazil and Madagascar. The twist was blunt. The skulls weren't sacred treasures or alien relics. They were clever forgeries carved in the 1800s to feed Europe's hunger for mystery. What people believed were timeless objects of wisdom turned out to be modern fakes. Proof not of lost civilizations, but of how easily people will believe when a story is too good to resist. In the early 1800s, dredging near the town of Chichester in southern England pulled up a massive stone head. Eroded and weathered almost beyond recognition, the face was worn down until only faint features remained. The nose was gone, the details lost. Scholars couldn't agree on who it represented. Some argued it was a Celtic chief. Others guessed it might be a forgotten Roman god. For 2 centuries, the Bosham Head sat as an unanswered riddle. To locals, it became a curiosity, impressive in size, but frustrating in its anonymity. The stone was too ruined to identify, too old to dismiss. Then, in 2013, researchers turned lasers on the ancient fragment. Using 3D scanning, they digitally reconstructed the missing parts of the face. When compared with Roman busts, the likeness became clear. The Bosham Head wasn't a Celtic leader or a nameless god. It was Emperor Trajan, the Roman ruler who expanded the empire to its greatest reach. That revelation changed the artifact's place in history. The head wasn't a random piece of stone. It had once been part of a colossal statue that stood in Britain's Roman harbor, a deliberate symbol of Rome's power over the province. What had looked like a faceless ruin was actually the image of one of Rome's most powerful generals, carved to remind the people of who commanded them. Imagine stepping into a temple courtyard 4,000 years ago, but this time, unlike what we expect, bright colors surround you, with giant birds and strange mythological beings staring down from the walls. For a long time, the mystery was whether early coastal societies in the Andes had this kind of advancement, like the Nazca lines, which were once assumed to be ceremonial art, or if that was only a thing in the highlands with cultures like the Chavin. Most experts believed the coast was plain and simple, with little in the way of ritual artwork. If you wanted monumental designs or bold spiritual symbols, you had to look to Chavin de Huantar centuries later. But these ideologies came crumbling down in September 2025, when archaeologists working at Huaca, Yolanda in Peru's Tunguska Valley uncovered something that completely changed everything. Inside a buried temple courtyard, they found a massive three-dimensional mural measuring 3 by 6 meters. It was not just some faded carving. It was alive with literal colors: blue, yellow, red, and black. At the center stood a bird of prey decorated with diamond-shaped patterns, surrounded by fish, nets, stars, mythical figures, and even what looked like a shaman turning into a bird. An unbelievable sight that had been hidden for years, painted onto the walls thousands of years ago. This was more than decoration to us. It was a mind-shifting discovery of how advanced people of the past were, with their own advanced ritual systems, complete with spiritual leaders, and maybe even knowledge of the stars, long before the Chavin came into the picture. Have you ever thought back to the moment Christianity swept through Europe in the 11th century? The normal idea was old pagan practices disappeared quickly. There was no overlap, no mixing, just a clean break. And whenever archaeologists found graves that looked like a mixture of Christianity and ancient rituals, they mostly overlooked them, claiming it might have been a mistake or confusion, especially because there wasn't so much of it. But the truth was far deeper than the thought. But recent excavations at the Nowy Chorów cemetery in northern Poland revealed burials that were not just mixed a bit, but fully blended two religions. Some graves were reopened many years later, not to rob them, and they found that they had Christian features, like the body laid east to west, and then included pagan touches such as spears, grave goods, or wooden buckets with iron fittings. One striking detail stood out. Instead of the body's feet pointing east as Christian tradition demanded, some were flipped with heads to the east, echoing older pagan customs. This was not a mistake. It was deliberate due to the consistency. This means that communities were carefully mixing old gods with a new one, treating funeral traditions that showed the cultural change going on at the time. But think about it. Imagine standing at a burial where some prayers were Christian while others carried pagan echoes. It must have been strange, but this was clearly what must have happened. These burials are now seen as rare, solid evidence of how people actually lived through that shift of belief. For centuries, historians saw Iron Age northern Britain as a simpler sibling of the South. The South had wagons, Mediterranean imports, and signs of wealth, while the North was seen, well, simpler, not connected to other nations, and poor. That idea had been held like that until the Melsonby Hoard changed everything. In late 2021, near Melsonby in North Yorkshire, a huge discovery was made, and it was fully excavated in 2022. Archaeologists pulled more than 800 Iron Age objects from the ground, dating from the 1st century BC to the 1st century AD. They discovered pieces from at least 7 four-wheeled wagons and chariots, horse harnesses for 14 animals, 28 iron tires, ornate spears, ceremonial cauldrons including a Mediterranean-style wine bowl, horse gear decorated with coral and colored glass, an iron mirror, and more. Many of the items have been burnt or broken before burial, likely as part of funerary rites or rituals connected to cremation. The size of it was unmatched in Britain, maybe even in Europe. The discovery proved that the northern elites were not an isolated nation. They must have been connected to the normal trade networks that went as far as the Mediterranean, even touching Roman influence. Have you ever thought about how far sailors of ancient times sailed without compasses, even in oceans as dangerous as the Pacific and the Atlantic? For years, historians believed sailors in that time would never dare to go so far. According to them, seafarers stayed close to land, using mountains and shorelines as their guide. Sailing far was too risky. But in 2023, in a natural gas survey off of Israel's coast, something unbelievable was seen. A robot submarine that dived nearly 2 kilometers down, about 90 kilometers from shore, found hundreds of Canaanite amphoras spread across the seabed. 2 were recovered for study, and they found out that these jars came from a merchant ship about 12 to 14 meters long, dating back to 1300 BCE. It was the first and oldest deep-sea wreck ever found in the eastern Mediterranean. The right question should be, what is a vessel doing in the Mediterranean at that time? The location of the wreck was proof that these sailors were not staying at the shore being afraid of the sea. They were navigating, likely by reading the sun and stars. I mean, think of it. You're out there with nothing but the night sky as your map. Well, the late Bronze Age mariners might not have had all the sufficient tools, but they had the courage and knowledge to make up for it. The wreck stands as proof that seafaring in that age was far more advanced than anyone imagined. Early explorers crossing Antarctica in the early 1900s stumbled upon a site that seemed impossible in the land of ice. Out of Taylor Glacier poured a stream of bright red water, staining the snow like a fresh wound across the white landscape. They named it Blood Falls, and the name alone was enough to spark decades of speculation. Some believe it was proof of alien microbes locked under the ice. Others thought a hidden volcano was bleeding into the glacier. A few claimed it was a sign that life could survive in the harshest conditions, maybe even on other planets like Mars. For years, samples were taken, theories tested, and still no single answer satisfied everyone. The waterfall kept running red, a strange wound in the ice that carried more questions than explanations. Eventually, scientists pieced the puzzle together. The water didn't come from the surface at all, but from a subglacial lake sealed off for more than 1 million years. The lake's brine was loaded with salt and iron, trapped without sunlight or oxygen. When it finally seeped through the cracks in the glacier and met the air, the iron oxidized. In other words, it rusted, and the water turned blood red. The site remains eerie, but the truth is completely earthly. Blood Falls isn't alien life or a volcano's secret vent. It's chemistry locked away in ice for ages, now revealed as the glacier bleeds rust across Antarctica. In 1976, NASA's Viking 1 orbiter snapped a black and white photograph of Mars that set imaginations ablaze. In the Cydonia region, a mesa shaped by shadows looked like a human face, complete with eyes, nose, and mouth. Newspapers around the world printed the image. Conspiracy theorists claimed it was proof of an ancient Martian civilization, a monument carved by intelligent beings. For many, the shape was too perfect to be coincidence. The photo became one of space exploration's most famous mysteries. Books and documentaries leaned on it as evidence that Mars had once been alive with builders and architects. For decades, the face on Mars was an icon of hope and speculation. But as technology improved, the illusion broke down. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, newer orbiters like Mars Global Surveyor and Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter captured high-resolution images of the same area. This time, under sharper focus and better lighting, the face vanished. The hill was nothing more than rock and shadows, shaped by erosion, not by alien tools. The real explanation lay in human psychology. Our brains are wired for pareidolia, the tendency to see faces in random objects, whether it's clouds, cliffs, or coffee foam. The Viking photo hadn't revealed a monument of a lost Martian empire. It revealed how eager humans are to see themselves in the unknown. In December 1872, sailors in the Atlantic spotted a ship drifting silently near the Azores. It was the Mary Celeste. Her sails were partly set, her cargo untouched, and her crew's belongings still stored below deck. Meals sat abandoned on the table, as if the sailors had left mid-bite. The ship was seaworthy, the weather calm, and yet the entire crew had vanished without a trace. The mystery gripped the world. Newspapers sensationalized the tale. Some blamed mutiny or piracy. Others conjured images of sea monsters, ghostly abductions, or alien kidnappings. For more than a century, the Mary Celeste sailed on in legend as the ultimate ghost ship. But science later offered a more human explanation. The cargo contained over 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol. In 2006, researchers studied how vapors from leaking barrels could have built up inside the ship's hold. Under the right conditions, those vapors could ignite in a terrifying invisible explosion, a burst of flame powerful enough to scare the crew into abandoning ship, but leaving no burn marks behind. Faced with any danger they couldn't see, Captain Briggs may have ordered the crew into the lifeboat, tying it to the Mary Celeste with a rope. If the line snapped, the ship would sail on without them, leaving the men stranded at sea. The vessel survived. Its people did not. The Mary Celeste wasn't haunted or cursed. It was a tragedy born of fear, alcohol fumes, and a single desperate decision. In 1990, archaeologists digging in a colonial graveyard in Griswold, Connecticut, uncovered a coffin with bones that had been deliberately rearranged. The skull and femurs were placed in a crossbones pattern over the chest. To modern eyes, it looked strange, but to people in the 1800s, it was perfectly logical. This was how you stopped a suspected vampire from returning to prey on the living. The skeleton was labeled JB55, based on initials carved into the coffin. For years, no one knew who he was. Local legends grew, casting him as proof of New England's vampire panic, a time when fear of the undead spread through small towns. The real answer came in 2019, when DNA was tested against genealogical records. JB55 turned out to be John Barber, a farmer who lived in the late 1700s or early 1800s. Historical records showed he died of tuberculosis, a disease that caused pale skin, weight loss, and bloody coughing. To communities that didn't understand infection, TB looked like vampirism, as if the dead were draining the life from the living. John Barber wasn't a vampire. He was a man who died of illness, remembered through the rituals of fearful neighbors. In a nutshell, the vampire was never Dracula, was never a vampire bat, or a person with sharp fangs. It was a disease the whole time. For centuries, the giant stones of Stonehenge stood as one of Britain's most enduring riddles. How could people thousands of years ago, without cranes or wheels, move blocks weighing up to 25 tons across the countryside? And where did those stones even come from? Early scholars offered wild theories. Some believed glaciers had dragged them into place. Others said giants had lifted them. Medieval tales even credited Merlin with summoning the stones by magic. The breakthroughs began in 2011, when archaeologists traced the smaller blue stones to quarries in Wales' Preseli Hills, nearly 150 miles away. That meant that they had been deliberately cut, transported, and placed with extraordinary care. In 2020, geochemical tests tracked the larger sandstone blocks called sarsens to Westwoods in Wiltshire, just 15 miles from the site. And in 2024, the mystery deepened again when the altar stone, the centerpiece of Stonehenge, was traced to southern Scotland, hundreds of miles to the north. Piece by piece, the riddle gave way to evidence. The stones hadn't arrived by accident or magic. They were moved by organized labor, planned routes, and careful engineering. What once seemed impossible was revealed as deliberate, coordinated human effort stretching across the island. Stonehenge wasn't the work of wizards or giants. It was the achievement of ancient engineers who built networks to carry their vision across Britain. In 1969, the Zodiac killer mailed one of his most infamous puzzles to the San Francisco Chronicle. It was a 340-character cipher arranged neatly in a grid. He bragged that cracking it would taunt the police and prove his brilliance. For decades, some of the world's greatest codebreakers tried to solve it. The FBI worked on it, the CIA worked on it, even the NSA tried, and nobody could crack the code. Speculation went wild. People thought it might contain his real name. Others believed it would confess to murders or reveal a secret plan. Entire communities of puzzle solvers obsessed over it. Books and documentaries built it up as the one clue that might finally unmask America's most notorious criminal. In December 2020, the mystery was finally solved. But the answer didn't come from government agencies. It came from 3 civilians: David Oranchak in the United States, Sam Blake in Australia, and Jarl van Eyck in Belgium. Using custom computer programs that tested thousands of possible transpositions, they broke the cipher at last. The result was shocking in its simplicity. The message didn't reveal a name. It wasn't a confession or a map. It was nothing more than the Zodiac mocking investigators, bragging that he wasn't afraid of execution and laughing at those who tried to catch him. For 50 years, people believed the cipher held the key to his identity. In truth, it was a dead end, designed to frustrate. The Zodiac had no intention of being revealed. The 340 cipher wasn't a clue to his identity. It was a cruel joke, meant to keep the world chasing shadows. On the island of Rapa Nui, giant stone figures known as Moai have stood for centuries, staring inland with blank expressions. Carved from volcanic rock, some weighing more than 80 tons. Early explorers were baffled. Were they gods, ancestor statues, or proof of a civilization with forgotten powers? The question of why and how they were built fascinated the world. The mystery deepened when most people assumed the Moai were only heads, but excavations revealed that many were full statues with torsos, arms, and intricate carvings, their bodies buried beneath centuries of soil. Even with that knowledge, the question lingered: why were they placed where they were? In 2019, researchers uncovered the answer. Careful mapping showed that the statues weren't placed randomly. They were positioned close to sources of fresh water. Springs bubbled from volcanic rock along the coast, and the Moai were set nearby. To the islanders, they were not just spiritual figures, but practical markers showing where survival could be found. That discovery changed the entire story. The Moai weren't mysterious guardians staring across the land. They were guides, blending spirituality with necessity, pointing communities towards water that they needed to live. What once looked like monuments of mystery turned out to be maps of survival carved in stone. In 541 AD, the Eastern Roman Empire was thriving under Emperor Justinian. The empire felt strong and unstoppable until disaster quietly slipped into its heart. Ships brought grain into Constantinople, and hidden within the sacks came rats carrying fleas, each one spreading an invisible killer. In just weeks, the city was overwhelmed. People burned with high fevers. their bodies swollen with painful lumps, and many died within days. This wave of sickness tore through the Mediterranean, claiming tens of millions of lives. For centuries, no one could agree on what caused it. Some thought poison air drifted through the streets. Others were sure it was divine punishment. The truth stayed out of reach, turning the plague into one of history's most frightening mysteries. Modern science finally broke the silence. By using advanced DNA testing, researchers studied teeth from ancient plague victims. Inside, they uncovered the genetic signature of Yersinia pestis, the exact same bacterium that would later cause the Black Death in medieval Europe. The discovery showed that the Justinian outbreak was not some unknown illness, but the earliest global pandemic of plague. The finding completely changed how we understand history. Pandemics were not random one-off events. They were repeating cycles that connected distant centuries. What people once saw as a curse from God was really a bacterial epidemic written in the bones of its victims. In 1960, a villager wandering into a cave in northern Greece stumbled across something bizarre. Stuck in layers of stone was a human skull that looked as if it had grown a horn. Scientists were stunned. Some claimed it was Neanderthal. Others argued it might belong to an entirely different species. That strange horn-like shape only deepened the mystery, sparking wild ideas about hybrids or genetic twists. For decades, the Petrolona skull confused experts and fueled speculation. The real explanation came much later. Modern dating showed the skull was about 300,000 years old, making it one of the oldest human fossils in Europe. Careful study revealed it did not belong to a Neanderthal, but to Homo heidelbergensis, an ancestor of both Neanderthals and modern humans. And that horn, it was not bone at all. It was calcite, a mineral from the cave that had slowly fused onto the skull over thousands of years, creating the illusion of a protrusion. What seemed like a freak mutation was actually geology preserving our ancestor in stone. The discovery proved that sometimes mysteries don't need fantasy explanations. They only need patience, science, and the passage of time. For generations, the Great Pyramid of Giza has pulled explorers, scholars, and dreamers toward it. Built more than 4,500 years ago, it was the resting place of Pharaoh Khufu. Narrow tunnels inside fueled endless rumors that more chambers, treasures, and secrets still hid behind its walls. Some whispered about cursed tombs, others imagined untouched vaults. The problem was that no one could cut into the pyramid without destroying it. Then modern technology stepped in. Using cosmic ray scans and tiny robotic explorers, archaeologists mapped the pyramid's interior without breaking a single block. In 2017, scientists confirmed the presence of a huge hidden space above the Grand Gallery. That was shocking enough. Then in 2024, researchers sent a lightweight robot into the Queen's chamber. It crawled through small shafts that no human could squeeze inside. What it filmed stunned the world. A chamber marked with painted symbols that no one had ever seen. The discovery reignited old debates. Were the markings part of rituals, left by builders as notes? Or did they serve as a symbolic role now long forgotten? Whatever their meaning, the fact that they had been sealed for thousands of years made them extraordinary. The chamber was not full of gold, but it carried knowledge. Its secrets were never meant to be unlocked by looters, but by patient science. Off the coast of Alexandria, hidden beneath the waves, lies the ghost of a city that was once a jewel of Egypt. Ancient writers praised Canopus as a center of temples, trade, and celebration, but over time the sea claimed it. Earthquakes and floods dragged it down, leaving only whispers and stories behind. For centuries, it looked like Canopus was more myth than memory. That changed when divers searching Abu Qurbe uncovered its ruins. Archaeologists found giant temples, colossal statues, and even a sphinx carved with the name of Ramses II. Stone docks stretched across the seabed, proof that the city had been a thriving port. Alongside the ruins were sunken ships, still carrying pieces of their cargo, frozen in time. The discoveries dating to the Ptolemaic and Roman periods placed Canopus at the heart of Egypt's power and wealth. Text had spoken of its beauty, but now the stones told the story themselves. Canopus wasn't a legend after all. It was real, and its remains show how even great civilizations can vanish beneath the waves, only to rise again centuries later through the work of divers and scientists. Picture yourself flying above a thick jungle, nothing but endless green stretching in every direction. Then, out of nowhere, a laser scan lights up the ground below, and the trees no longer hide what lies underneath. Straight lines crisscross like a secret map, not animal tracks, but wide stone roads carefully built by human hands. These weren't small dirt paths leading from one tiny village to another. They connected a massive area, nearly 650 square miles, bigger than the city of Las Vegas today. Imagine the scene: armies marching in formation, traders leading caravans of goods, priests guiding sacred rituals, all moving along these grand highways. Built with precision, some of them lined up perfectly with the stars, marking the solstices like a giant calendar written in stone. The Maya weren't simply traveling, they were shaping their entire world as if guided by the heavens themselves. For a long time, historians saw Maya cities as lonely islands swallowed by trees. Now, we know better. They were vast connected hubs tied together by these superhighways that kept their shape even after centuries of rain and vines tried to bury them away. In Ukraine, a quiet dig turned into something far darker. Archaeologists studying a site from the Kukatina Tripelia culture uncovered a mass of remains dating to around 3690 to 3620 BCE. They long existed for thousands of years before Mesopotamia and Egypt rose to power. 7 individuals had died there, but not of natural causes. 2 skulls bore clear signs of violent blows, evidence of deliberate killing. Others appeared to have been trapped in a fire that swept through their home. The mystery deepened when researchers realized one skull had been placed on top of the burial after the fact. This strange act hinted at ritual, revenge, or a warning to others. Were these people the victims of an attack, a sacrifice, or something even more complex? The answers may never be clear, but the evidence speaks of violence and ritual tangled together. For thousands of years, the scene lay undisturbed, a prehistoric crime locked in silence. Modern forensic tools turned it into the oldest known cold case, giving us a haunting glimpse of human conflict in the Stone Age. Near Melbourne, a series of ring-shaped formations in the earth puzzled locals for years. Were they natural? Were they signs of something alien? Research finally revealed the truth, and it was more unbelievable than the myths. The rings were not an accident caused by nature. Rather, they were ceremonial grounds created by the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people thousands of years ago. Some of them dated back to 14,000 years, making them part of one of the world's oldest continuous cultural evidences. They were gathering sites where communities held rituals, meetings, and shared traditions that bound them together. For outsiders, the rings were an unsolved riddle. For the Wurundjeri, they had always been part of their history. Science only confirmed what local knowledge had stored for generations. The Sunbury rings remind us that not even mystery is about what we lost. Some are about rediscovering what was never forgotten. That is, if we are willing to listen. Heraklion, or Tanis as the Egyptians called it, was more than a city. It was Egypt's front door to the world long before Alexandria was founded. Traders, sailors, and merchants who wanted to reach Egypt had to come through its harbors first. Wealth poured in, temples shone with offerings, and life bustled on the streets. Then disaster struck. In a single moment, the ground beneath shifted. An earthquake liquefied the earth, turning solid land into quicksand. Entire temples, statues, and homes sank below the waves, as if the sea itself had swallowed the city whole. For generations, people thought it was a myth, another version of Atlantis told around fires. But in 2000, divers finally saw the truth. Among the ruins, they found a colossal 16-foot statue of Hapi, the god of flooding, face down in the mud. The irony was chilling. The god of the flood had been trapped forever beneath the very waters he ruled. Walk into a modern museum and you'll see marble statues lined up, usually smooth and white. But here's the confusing part. The Greeks never saw them that way. With the help of ultraviolet light and high-powered microscopes, scientists discovered specks of color clinging to the stone. Based on the discovery, it means that once these statues were alive with brightness. Heroes and gods stood painted in likely bold reds or blues, even gold. One sphinx from 500 BC was decorated like a canvas, feathers in crimson and navy forming a pattern as striking as body art today. These weren't just colors for beauty, they carried meaning, signs of power, divine rank, and identity. For centuries, scholars admired the purity of white marble, but to the Greeks, a bare white statue would have felt unfinished, stripped down, like leaving a god without their robe. In the heart of the Maya city of Tikal in Guatemala, water was life. The people relied on huge reservoirs, carefully built to hold rain during dry seasons. But those same lifelines held a slow and deadly secret. The Maya loved cinnabar, a bright red powder they used to paint temples and pottery. The catch? Cinnabar is mercury, and every rainfall carries traces of it into the reservoirs. Over time, mercury built up layer after layer at the bottom of the pools. And to make matters worse, toxic blue-green algae flourished, the kind so stubborn that even boiling couldn't kill it. What was once a source of survival turned into poison. Scientists uncovered mercury-soaked sediments that told the story like a layered diary of history. When drought struck in the 800s, the people faced a terrible choice: drink water that could slowly kill them or leave behind their city. In the end, most abandoned Tikal, leaving homes and temples standing quiet, like a ghost city sealed in time. The Egyptians were masters of writing long before others caught up. On papyrus sheets, scribes used black for everyday records and red for sacred or urgent notes. But there was more to their ink than met the eye. Hidden inside was lead. It wasn't poison in this case, it was innovation. The lead helped the ink dry faster, sinking deep into the fibers so the words stayed sharp and crisp. Modern X-rays revealed details as fine as if they had been printed by a modern machine. By mixing phosphates and sulfates in ways no one else would figure out for thousands of years, they created writing that was nearly impossible to erase. And that's why, even after 3,000 years, their lists, prayers, and stories still appear almost fresh, as if the ink was written yesterday. In 1890, workers digging in a Russian peat bog pulled up something strange: a tall wooden figure covered in carved faces and patterns. At first, no one knew its age. Years later, science revealed the truth. The Shagir idol is 12,000 years old, making it the oldest wooden statue ever discovered. This is twice as old as the Egyptian pyramid, and of course, the Stonehenge. Once towering 17 feet, it was carved using beaver jaws as tools. Zigzags, waves, and 7 human-like faces run down its length, staring straight through time. The only reason it survived was the peat bog itself. The waterlogged soil sealed and preserved it like a natural time capsule. Its meaning is still unknown, but its age alone shattered old beliefs. It proved that earlier hunter-gatherers were already creating massive symbolic art long before history said they could. Across parts of Europe, beneath calm lakes, lie perfect wooden rings, not piles of driftwood, but carefully built structures shaped with Stone Age tools. These circles were once built on land thousands of years ago. Over time, as water levels rose, they sank beneath the surface. The lack of oxygen preserved them, freezing them. The construction is impressive, with joinery so advanced it once seemed impossible for the period. The purpose remains a mystery. Were they homes raised on posts above water, ritual spaces for ceremonies, or even early calendars carved out of wood? Whatever the reason, they're reminders that innovation and design didn't always need stone or metal to thrive. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, it didn't just bury Pompeii. In Herculaneum, the heat turned an entire library into fragile black scrolls. They looked like brittle charcoal tubes, so delicate that touching them meant destroying them. For centuries, they sat unread, taunting historians, making them wonder what wisdom they had lost that day and what changes those libraries would have brought to the world if they had survived peradventure. That changed when technology caught up. Using CT scans and AI, researchers began to virtually unwrap the scrolls, tracing the faint patterns of ink hidden inside. Slowly, words emerged for the first time in nearly 2,000 years. What they found was incredible. Writings about happiness, pleasure, and even the nature of color itself. The Vesuvius Challenge turned this decoding process into a global effort, finally bringing Roman philosophy back to life after being silent for centuries. In the Peruvian desert, 13 stone towers rise along a ridge, like a staircase pointing toward the sky. For years, the Chanquillo purpose was a mystery. Some argued that the massive walls stood as a fortress. Others saw it as a pure ceremonial center where ancient religious rituals were carried out. No one knew that before Stonehenge, Chanquillo stood ages for the same purpose, with even clearer precision. But we now know that it formed one of the earliest observatories in the world. At solstices and equinoxes, the sun appeared between specific towers, letting ancient astronomers track the seasons with precision. Painted in yellows and ochres, they would have glowed like bright markers against the desert. Built more than 2,300 years ago, long before the Incas, this giant calendar still works today. The builders may have been forgotten, but their design keeps marking the passage of time, stone by stone, sunrise by sunrise. Thank you for listening. I'm Mickey V. Like and subscribe to get more stories like this.